All right, let's get into it. We're talking spies, showdowns, and superpowers. This is the Cold War. So think about this for a second. How can the world's two biggest powers go to war, but never actually fire a single shot at each other? It's a crazy paradox, right? But for nearly half a century, that was the reality. This wasn't a war fought on a traditional battlefield. Nope, it was fought with ideas, with propaganda, with smaller wars by proxy, and always, with the terrifying threat of total nuclear annihilation hanging over everyone's heads. So, where does this all start? Well, picture this. World War II has just ended. The world is in ruins, and everyone is just hoping for some peace. But instead, a totally new kind of conflict starts to bubble up, one that splits the entire globe in two, drawing a hard line right through the middle of Europe. And really, it all came down to two completely opposite ways of seeing the world. On one side, you had the Soviets. They put up what Winston Churchill famously called an Iron Curtain, basically a huge political and military wall to keep capitalism out and expand their communist influence. And on the other side, America. Their whole strategy was called containment. The goal was super simple: stop communism from spreading no matter where it popped up. And those two clashing ideas, they would pretty much define the next 50 years. And it didn't stay a war of ideas for long. The world pretty quickly picked teams. In one corner, you had the United States and its friends forming NATO, that's the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and in the other corner, the Soviet Union and its satellite states created the Warsaw Pact. A line was officially drawn in the sand. So where did this all come to a head for the first time? Right here, Berlin. Now, you can see on the map the city was split, but it was sitting deep inside Soviet-controlled East Germany. So in 1948, Stalin decided to play hardball. He blockaded all the roads and railways into West Berlin, basically trying to starve the city into giving up. But America, they weren't having it. They launched the Berlin Airlift, flying in food and supplies for almost a whole year. It was an absolutely incredible feat, and a huge win for the West, symbolically. But this fight wasn't just about territory in Europe. The Cold War became this intense psychological game, a war of nerves. It was fought in government buildings, yeah, but also in schools, in living rooms, right inside people's heads. Fear itself became the main weapon. Back in the US, this fear of communism really started to turn inward, creating this massive paranoia. There was a congressional committee called the House Un-American Activities Committee, or HAWAC for short, and they started these really high-profile investigations, basically hunting for communists anywhere they could find them: Hollywood, universities, even the government. A lot of people started calling them modern-day witch hunts. And yeah, this wasn't just some political theater. Look at this number, 1,456. That's how many federal employees were fired because of something called the Federal Loyalty Security Program. And get this, they weren't all communists. They were just labeled security risks for all sorts of reasons, from having a drinking problem to being gay. The paranoia had real, life-shattering consequences. And then, in October 1957, this war of nerves it went cosmic. The Soviet Union launched Sputnik, the very first artificial satellite. For Americans on the ground, hearing that little beep, beep, beep as it passed overhead, it was a complete and utter shock. People called it a technological Pearl Harbor. Oh man, the panic was instant. The thinking was, wait a minute, if they can put a satellite into orbit, what's stopping them from launching a nuke at New York? For the very first time, people started to question if America was really number one in technology. The country's confidence was just shattered. And all of a sudden, what your kids were learning in math and science class became a matter of national security. But sometimes panic can lead to incredible action. And that's exactly what happened. In direct response to Sputnik, the US government did two things that would change the world. First, they passed the National Defense Education Act to pump a ton of money into science education. And second, they created a brand new agency just for space exploration, NASA. And just like that, the space race was on. But this whole race to space, it was really just the opening act for the most dangerous chapter of the entire Cold War. In the early 1960s, with John F. Kennedy as president, the world would come terrifyingly close to nuclear war, closer than ever before or since. And wow, did things escalate quickly. In 1961, you had the Bay of Pigs invasion, a total disaster that just pushed Cuba right into the arms of the Soviets. Just months later, boom, the Berlin Wall goes up overnight, and all of this was building to a climax: the Cuban Missile Crisis, the 13 days that almost ended everything. The Berlin Wall, I mean, look at it. It was this brutal, concrete symbol of the whole conflict. And here's the thing you have to remember, it wasn't built to keep West Berliners out. It was built to lock East Germans in. It was a desperate move to stop the flow of people who were literally running away from the failures of communism to find a better life in the West. And then, the moment everyone had been dreading. American spy planes fly over Cuba, and what do they find? Soviet nuclear missile sites being built just 90 miles off the coast of Florida. These things could hit Washington, D.C. in minutes. Kennedy's response was a naval quarantine, basically a blockade, and he went on TV and told the world that any missile launched from Cuba would trigger a full-scale nuclear attack on the Soviet Union. For 13 days, the entire planet just held its breath, waiting to see if this was it. Okay, so after staring right into the abyss of nuclear war, both superpowers kind of realized that a direct fight was completely insane. It was unthinkable. But the Cold War didn't end. Oh no, it just changed tactics. It went underground and erupted into these incredibly brutal hot wars fought by proxy all over the world. And the biggest, most tragic example was Vietnam. So how did the US get so deeply involved? It all started in August 1964 with this really murky incident in the Gulf of Tonkin involving some US destroyers and North Vietnamese boats. To this day, people debate what exactly happened, but it didn't matter. Congress passed the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, which basically gave President Lyndon Johnson a blank check to send hundreds of thousands of American troops to Vietnam. And for years, the official story coming from the top brass, from guys like General Westmoreland, was always the same. We're making progress. The war is going well. We can see the light at the end of the tunnel. But this is what shattered that illusion. In January of 1968, the Viet Cong launched the Tet Offensive, a massive, shocking, coordinated attack all across South Vietnam. Now, militarily, it was a huge loss for them, but psychologically, for the United States, it was a catastrophe. It proved to everyone back home that the government hadn't been telling the truth. The war was nowhere near over, and that was the moment American public opinion really turned against it for good. So when you look back, the legacy of Vietnam, and really the whole Cold War, is this incredibly messy mix of triumph and tragedy, of amazing innovation and just unbelievable destruction. And this slide just captures that contradiction perfectly. On one hand, you have one of humanity's greatest achievements, the moon landing in 1969, a direct result of that Cold War space race. And on the other hand, you have the absolute horror of the My Lai massacre from 1968, where American soldiers killed hundreds of unarmed civilians. It's this gut-wrenching contrast between reaching for the stars and descending into the deepest darkness of war. The numbers are just staggering. Over 50,000 Americans killed, 300,000 wounded. But the war also changed America itself. Congress passed the War Powers Act to try and stop a president from ever having that much unchecked power to go to war again. And for the veterans who came home, so many of them faced a really tough return, battling physical wounds, PTSD, and a country that was completely torn apart by the very war they had just fought. So in the end, the two superpowers never actually launched their nukes at each other. The Cold War didn't end with a bang. It sort of just fizzled out when the Soviet Union collapsed. But it leaves us with this huge lingering question, doesn't it? This war that wasn't technically a war still cost millions of lives in other countries. It cost trillions of dollars, and it trapped generations in fear. So you have to ask yourself, what was the true cost of it all?